Okay, so for this video, I want to cover more about large language models. What are some of their limitations? Many components that go behind the scenes to get more context or more usefulness broadly from a large language model. So I made this process diagram using AI as a starting point, but just to illustrate the concept of what we'll cover today, and I'll show the code that I drafted to use. And all this is open source. I am using Groq, if you have heard of Groq API. It's essentially a free developer use of large language models. It's one of the fastest AI inferences out there. So highly encourage, if you're trying to use open source like Llama-3, Mixtral, things like that, to get a Groq API key to use this. I'll also put some of this source code up so you can see what is going on. So to walk you through the demo I'm going to show today is essentially we have our model when we think about our large language model, and this is going to be, I like to think of models generally as they're predefined, they're trained to a certain time frame, similar to a library. They have vast amounts of knowledge, but they're trained up to a certain point, whether that is 6 months ago, last month, 9 months ago, whichever the case may be. As far as when they are published, they have a specific finite amount of knowledge to that time frame. Now, when you're trying to expand to some more edge use cases, i.e., for instance, Microsoft's earnings came out today in Q4 2024. If you're trying to do some analysis based on that, it's not going to be trained up to that point, is what I'm saying. So we typically have various components that we use to add more value to the large language model, or add context, if you will. So this can be RAG broadly, or what we call function calling. You'll hear this function calling assistance as well. Now, very different concepts. RAG will embed a knowledge base, if you will, typically using some vector store. But this is just to give you an idea of various functionalities that you can use. Now, let me make sure I separate this, and I'll separate the function calling. But broadly, we want to think about, okay, how can we get more out of this, right? So we can go with RAG, or we can call external tools. Now, for this video, I'm going to use tools. Now, tools essentially extend our function from our large language model when it doesn't understand the knowledge, right? So if the knowledge isn't known to the large language model, then we can access a tool that can open up that knowledge in real time. So for the purposes of this, I'm going to be using the Bing API. And if you want to use the Bing API, you can deploy that through Azure. They do have a free model specifically. I won't show you how to go through there, but just to give you a primer. So if I type in Bing API, it'll go through the whole web search API. Now, it's important to note, from the terms of service of using the Bing API with large language models, you have to distinguish from the results what's different from being what is searched, right? And then what is the large language model's response. And I'm going to show you what that means in a second. So to talk you through what I'm going to go through here, I'm playing the persona as the user, right? I'm going to put an input similar to what is Microsoft's Q4 2024 earnings as an example. This is new knowledge, right? That is as of today, July 30th, 2024. And we're going to see what the results are. We're going to take that context from our search results, and then we're going to feed that to the LLM to give us a response back, okay? So think about this as we're reaching outbound, right? This is going to access the Bing API right here. And then once this response gets parsed, it's going to go to our API. We're going to process that, and then we're going to show you what that looks like back to the user, okay? And I have this color-coded to differentiate against the results, and I'll talk you through the code. Let me switch over. Okay, so we should be seeing the terminal here. Now, we'll start at the top, and I'll kind of break this down, and I'll zoom in a little bit for the views here. Okay. So we have our imports, our OS, we have our request, our JSON. I'm using the rich library through Python, and I create a console essentially here. I try to put as many notes as possible. I'm using a .env file for environment variables, so you won't see any API keys, things like that. From that perspective, as always, I have a get ignore already pre-populated. So we have our Bing search subscription key. This essentially retrieves the Bing API search that allows us to search, and then this calls the base URL. Essentially, that's what we're calling. So we define our function, right? We have a search, we're passing a query into the search, and I've put a little subset here. Essentially, we're gonna grab those results, put that in a list, and then we're gonna do a for loop on that list, and we're gonna go through title, name, link, and a snippet of it, okay? And then we're gonna initiate Groq. So this will call the Groq library. We'll do an import for that. I'll put documentation in the link as well in the description so you can get some more info. But really, if you're using OpenAI or Anthropic, they all kind of follow the similar pattern. So essentially the Groq API is here. So we can see here the class, it's calling an API key, a base URL, etc. They're all formatted, I would say, fairly similar in nature. So it shouldn't be too hard. So this is going to pull the Groq API key, which I already have in loaded. And then we're going to simply prompt the user to enter a query. Then we're going to run through the conversation. So now this is where we expand our large language models capability. So we call our tools here. We have our function, we have search. So we're looking for a property, we're looking for an object search. We know it's a type string. I put a small description here from another snippet of code, but this captures the same thing. It's just formatted a little different. Now notice we have Llama-3B that we're running here. And then we are essentially creating our client call. We're going to go through the response, and then we're going to run through our tools to see what's available functions, telling the large language model, here are the tools that are available. So we're going to print out two responses. You're going to see the consoles. I'm going to print the model response right in bold red, and then it's also going to have it in green. And let me change that to red just so we can differentiate a little better. And then we're going to get the final response, and that's going to be in blue. Now, some of the raw response I've kept just so you can kind of see what's going on. And then once we do a print, we're going to run this function call up here, the run conversation, and we're going to pass that query in there, okay? So I'm going to show you how this works. Let me clear up my terminal, and we will run our function or our Python code. So now you'll see here, this is going to run the main.py, essentially all of this. Now it's going to say enter desired query. I'm going to go through here. MSoft is the ticker for Microsoft earnings in Q4 2024. And let me pull this up a little bit so you can see. Okay, so you can see the model's response, right? Now you'll notice here it's going to transfer from the role to similar, if it says system, right? Now this is going to call an assistant. It realizes it's not trained up to that, right? Now we're going to go into our chat call completions, and then it's going to pass in our query as the argument, right? Essentially what it's passing to the search function, if you will. Final response, you've called tool, and if you see, it gives it a unique name for our tool. And then this is essentially from the Bing API search, right? So you can see here, these are essentially printing out the title, right? The name, anything related to that, and essentially a snippet as well. So you can see here, earnings conference call will be hosted. The call will be webcast. Q4 earnings is expected to be released, right? And then this is essentially any queries related to that, right? It will talk about what is populated from that. These results are based on news articles, and analyst estimates may not reflect actual performance, right? So now we can see the raw final response. You have called a tool and it's resulted in Q4 earnings. Here's a summary of the results, right? So this will say, we'll host its earnings call. The call will be led here. The earnings report is expected to be released, right? So maybe that's not all the info I want to see, right? Maybe I want a little bit more, and it's kind of weird because I called this a second ago and it gave me more than this. So let me refactor that call, okay? So let me call that again. And this will also, when I print out the raw response, you're seeing specifically the amount of tokens, right? So the completion tokens, the prompt tokens that we give it, and then the total tokens together. But you can see the completion time is surprisingly really fast with Groq. So let me see here. So I'm going to expand a little bit. What is Microsoft's earnings for Q4 22? Provide insights and analysis based on the results. Oh, so now I got none. Okay, so let me refactor that. So maybe it's because I asked for analysis based on the results. Let me do provide insights, and we'll leave it at that. We'll see. Okay, here are some key insights. So I'm not sure why I didn't like that last one. That's why you always want to test it. Okay, so it says now they are released, right? So the last one is kind of giving us a pre-read from that MSoft earnings in Q4. So it's going to take that literally to the query, and then it's just populating information about when they are released. Now I'm asking, okay, provide me insights, right? Now, of course, this is going to make inference to those results. If you can see the revenue reported, right, this will tell you up 15% year over year, operating income, etc., and then a breakdown, right? Some notable quotes from the call, and then this breaks this down a little bit further. So now you can see the raw response, right? So we've segmented, okay, what is from our specific search, right? I have that bolded in blue because it's essentially calling. Now we can see here, initially it's going to print this as static, the model response up here. Now notice that it's not printing out any parameter. So anything below that, right, should that have been in red, it would be a response there. So since it realizes its knowledge is only trained up to a certain time frame, it's going to rely on the assistants to then do the tool calling as well, okay? So important distinction there. Now notice as well, the final response that we have that's in bold blue is going to be essentially what is generated from our search query, okay? So these are all here. And then now we have the raw response, which should be in yellow, but it looks like it interpreted in some form of green. So I'll have to take a look at that. But you can see here the earnings were released. Here are some key insights, right? Revenues up 15% year over year, operating income, etc. So this essentially shows you how to use a large language model to extend the capabilities using some of the function calling, right? Now this is just a very raw, quick example. I wouldn't say go out and run with this, but you want to think about these as areas that you can expand what responses you get that are more personalized to your specific use case. So i.e. if I was thinking about investing in any type of investments and I wanted to run some insights on that, but I know that the large language model is trained up to a certain time frame, right? Whether I can use RAG to retrieve some form of 10Ks or some financial information to ground the system, or I can reach outbound using some type of search capability that is then paired with the large language model to get us a more intelligent response, right? So to demonstrate that this moves even further, right, we want to think about the Olympics that are going on in Paris right now. So I can say, what is the temperature currently in Paris? What is the current temperature in Paris? Forecast. And let me be specific too, Paris, France, and forecast for the week. So knowing that this is trained to a certain time frame, right, now we can see the response. This output appears to be a list of forecasts from varying resources. So now I can get accurate weather from specific areas, and you can see it's even converted to Fahrenheit if you're in North America like myself. And then you can see the current temperature forecast for the week. And then thank you for providing the output. Appears this line of output, and then it essentially regurgitates those resources in a raw format, if you will. So you can see that this can extend that capability. Now, it's also important to note, like anything with in terms of cost, right? Given that you're using the Bing API, there's a free tier to use, so it's not completely pay to play per se, but it's also important to note there's obviously limitations. Same thing with Groq. You use it with reasonable terms, but this is just to demonstrate for other learners that don't have an Azure subscription or predominantly like an Azure OpenAI or don't want to use GPT and you want to use one of those open models. Groq is what I use to do quite a lot of testing. So I will post some of the source code inside the GitHub repository soon. But just to show you and demonstrate how you can get more out of your large language models by using tool calling. I'll also do some form of agents in the future. I just haven't sat down and deciphered a full graph for what agents I want to put together, but I just wanted to demonstrate the use of tools.